Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and a huge thank you for joining us. So, my name is Ben Miller, and I lead the solution engineering team here in EMEA. I'm joined by my fantastic colleague Amar, who will actually be taking you through how to build all of this. So, we were blown away by the response to our webinar last month, and it's really fantastic to see so many of you back for round two, as well as quite a lot of new faces as well. So, today, we're going to be tackling a challenge I suspect many of you have faced. You've invested a lot in AI models, you have a lot of data, but how do you actually get actionable insight from them into the hands of your business team so they can actually drive meaningful change? So, before we get into the hands on building, I want to give a brief introduction and explain why I believe we're seeing so many customers, from AI natives like OpenAI and NVIDIA to more traditional organizations like Reckitt or Decathlon, leverage Retool as their application layer for AI. I'm particularly excited about this use case, as I remember spending quite literally 2 months building something very similar to this when I was studying for my master's in AI a few years back. And it's amazing to see how when you combine the advances in models, as well as the ability to build front ends quickly, you can basically do all of this in under an hour now. Those of you that joined us for the last webinar will be familiar with this, but we think about AI in three main ways at Retool. So firstly, how can we actually leverage AI to build applications more quickly? I don't love the term, but some of our customers have described this as almost like enterprise vibe coding. And we'll actually be walking through some best practice for this in our next webinar in September, and we'll provide sign-up details at the end. Where we're focusing today is all around AI for end users. So making it as easy as possible for you to infuse these insights you generate from AI to actually all of your employees. We focused on agents in our last webinar, and this was really around enabling you to build agents to complete tasks fully autonomously. And all of this is supported by the robust security and governance features you expect from us. So why have we decided to invest in all of this? Our central premise is that the more customized the tool is to your specific business processes, the more value you're going to get from it. So whilst a tool like ChatGPT is brilliant, I use it pretty much every day in my work, it makes me make maybe 5 or 10% more efficient. But to achieve genuine organizational change, we need tooling built for your entire employee base, fully customized to your business. And that's what we help our customers do. So with that, I'll hand over to the person you're actually all here to see, which is Amar. So Amar will take you through step by step building this products insight suite from scratch. So over to you, Amar.
Thank you very much, Ben. Uh, cool. So I'll start with a quick agenda, and can I just get a check in the chat that everyone can hear me loud and clear, and you can see my screen as well? Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, I know we've got a lot of people here from across the globe, so this is great. So today, I'd like to start a little bit with kind of what inspired this webinar and talk about the current challenges that I'm seeing with you guys and with other customers as well, implementing AI systems into production. Now, I used to work at British Airways, as some of you might know, and I used to be kind of more on a data science side of things. So I very much understand the challenges of trying to take something from like a notebook or an idea all the way into something that can actually run in production. The next thing we'll do is I'll talk a little bit about the background to the webinar that we're going to do today. So it'll just be a little bit of context to understand why we're looking to build what we're building and what value it's going to add to the kind of mock business that I've created. Then the kind of meat of the session will be building out the solution, and that will be a 45-minute, hopefully, session, and then we'll use the remaining 10 minutes to do a Q&A. For building the solution, there's a link at the top of the chat, and Nathan will post it again when we get started with detailed instructions that you can follow, but also you'll be able to follow directly watching the call as well. So let's start with the current challenges for AI. The first challenge that I've seen is that use cases are ideas, but there's not necessarily a clear ROI behind them. And what that means is maybe people are struggling to understand exactly where we can use LLMs and use agentic AI that can do work faster and more efficiently than humans can. The second is that AI is being used by individuals. I'm sure you've all used ChatGPT at some point, but ChatGPT isn't integrated into our systems. And that's why we launched the Agents product, and Nathan showed that in the last webinar. This means that generally there's a lower impact from adopting AI because it's only being used as a kind of tool that you can call externally, but not deeply embedded within business processes. And the third is that people just have no idea what to build, really. There's a lot of things that you can do, and it's quite difficult to cut through that. So on to today. What I'd like to do is present you a use case that has a very clear ROI that can be integrated into your systems and introduces two new ideas for where AI can be used within your organization. So, today's scenario. You're working for a highly specialized, although probably a little bit bizarre, e-commerce company that sells only two products, headphones and shorts. I don't know about this shop, guys, but maybe it could be interesting. So currently, the product review data is being manually labeled by Jerry, and Jerry's a data analyst, so it's not quite his full-time job. And customer support relies on him to get information about the product specific. So if someone calls up and says, "Hey, what's the warranty on my headphones?" they might have to access some data store that's built and maintained by Jerry. Now, the company's expanding because headphones and shorts don't quite cut it for the market that they want to address. And so they're going to face two key challenges as they introduce more and more products into their business. The first is that Jerry's not going to be able to label all of the reviews once they have hundreds of products. And this means that we're going to need some system to help him and help enable the labeling to carry on. The other is that he's also not going to be able to maintain the system that customer support teams use to provide that information to customers. And they're not going to be able to very quickly upskill and memorize all of this information from all the new products. So we're going to solve those challenges today by building a system that is going to enable this e-commerce company to scale. So here's what we're going to build. We'll start with a workflow, and this workflow is going to process the review exactly like Jerry would by using AI to label the review. And then we'll upload the labeled reviews to a database. Then we'll visualize that data in a dashboard. Now, I know dashboards can be tricky in Retool because Retool is not necessarily a BI first solution, but also allows you to do a lot more than that. And therefore, dashboarding isn't the easiest compared to maybe another tool. So we'll try and look to rectify that today. The last is a RAG knowledge bot. So this will be up and running in hopefully under a minute, where we can actually have a bot that has business context that can answer questions about the products. This means that the customer support team will be able to use the bot rather than go to Jerry directly and allow him to free up some time to work on his main job. So let's build. To start with, if everyone could navigate to the Google Doc that contains instructions and amiragents.retool.com, which is our Retool instance. So what you should see is a Google Doc that looks like this and have a link to a folder which looks like this. Uh, can you share the Google Doc in the channel? Thanks. Ben, I think you need to share with everyone. And once you have navigated to this page, if you can go ahead and press create new and create a new workflow up here, oops, then I'll go ahead and hopefully see that you've created a bunch of workflows here. Okay, if you can make sure to make your workflow inside the Product Insight Suite folder, just because then it will be a little bit easier to manage afterwards. The link to this page, if you can't find it, is also in the Google Doc under step 1. Okay, I see a few people have started to make their workflows. So hopefully once you've made your workflow, you'll be on this screen up here. And just please feel free to use the chat if you do get stuck, because Nathan and Ben will be on hand to answer any questions as required. You shouldn't need to look at the doc too much. It just contains some of the things that I'll be typing in case you need to copy and paste or if you need to go back. So just to confirm, is there anyone who's not got to this screen yet? Otherwise, I'll carry on. If you're unable to access the Retool instance, just post your email, and Nathan can send you an invite. You should have received one around 11 a.m. today, and it might be in your spam folder as well. Cool. All right, I'll carry on. So to start with, the first thing that we can do, and if you haven't been able to log in, you can follow the instructions to catch up. But the first thing we'd like to do is we're going to build a workflow that's going to allow us to take the review text in its raw format. So something like, as in the Google Doc, this lacrosse ball is great. And then we're going to do two things to that review. We're first going to classify the sentiment behind the review. So is it positive, negative, or mixed? Because that's what Jerry was doing. And we'll also classify the feature that the review was talking about. So once we've got the feature and the sentiment, we'll upload that into our database. So the first thing we'll do is we'll take a review and paste that into our test parameters so that we can test everything out. So if you can copy or write out the JSON that's provided in the Google Doc, it should be something like this. Apologies, I can't quite zoom in on my screen, but you should hopefully be able to see that there is a product name and some text. So if you can paste that into the test JSON parameters section, this is the test review we'll be using to then categorize using AI. Next, once you've pasted this in, what we're going to do is we'll remove this existing code block because we don't need it. And instead, we're going to use Retool's AI action block. So the AI action, which is available here, maybe I can zoom, no. The AI action is how we can access any model that we like using Retool. And this is the same in the app builder and in the workflows editor. So if you go ahead and click AI action, you'll be able to see different endpoints that you can pick from that's using your pre-configured, or in our case, our pre-configured Retool AI resource. In this case, we've connected it to OpenAI. Yeah, apologies, I can't zoom in on this view. It won't let me. But hopefully you can still see and follow along. So what we're going to do is we'll choose. We want to classify the text. So we want to classify whether this review looks pretty positive, so we expect it to be positive. Now, we could use the generate text endpoint, which you guys are probably used to from talking to ChatGPT and things like that. And this is a standard endpoint that's available for a lot of different model providers, not just OpenAI. However, the problem with it is that it then produces unstructured output. And so you have to then process that output because it might output a sentence rather than just the thing that you're looking for. So instead, we're going to use the classify endpoint. So if you go ahead and change this to classify text, what this will do is it then outputs one of a pre-selected set of classification labels. And this allows us to extract structured data from unstructured. So now that we have this, let's put in a prompt. So we want the AI to classify the sentiment of the review. So let's type in classify the review sentiment. And if you do get stuck, you can copy and paste this from the Google Doc. And let's reference starttrigger.data.text. And this is using Retool's double curly brace notation. So if you type in a double curly, what that allows you to do is reference any other block's properties from this block. So in this case, I'm referencing the start trigger block, which has data, which contains our product name and our text. And in this case, I'm accessing the text. Now, we want to guide our model to not just output anything, but output specifically three labels: positive, negative, or mixed. So if you go ahead down to the classification labels section and type in positive in all lowercase and then hit enter, then type negative or lowercase and enter, and then mixed. So this will allow us to bucket the review sentiment into one of three categories. You can keep the model as 4.0 mini for now, because it's probably going to be the best for this task. We'll also rename our block, because then we can reference it later. So if I call this classify sentiment, and then I can go ahead and run it. Now we may run into a rate limiting issue if too many people try and click this, but hopefully you should be able to play the block and see that the AI has classified our review as positive. So to recap, we added a new Retool AI block, called it classify sentiment, changed it to being classify the text rather than generating text, gave it three labels to choose from, and then passed in a prompt that also passed in the text to classify. Now we're going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to classify which product feature the review is talking about. So we'll do exactly the same steps. So we'll drag in a new Retool AI block called AI action, but this time we'll call it classify feature. Again, we want to use the classify text endpoint. And now I'm going to prompt it slightly differently, because I'm going to say determine which product feature the review is talking about. And I'll also give it a failsafe option so that if it can't decide, it can just put none. None of the options are mentioned. Classify it as none. So this will allow us to see which reviews are talking positively about which products and which features are being mentioned the most in our products. Next, we'll put in a classification label. In this case, we'll mention the color, and we'll also add none as an option as well. Now, the last thing we need to do is actually paste in the review text. So I'll go ahead and add it here into our input. And again, we'll use the double curly brace notation to reference start trigger data text. So to summarize, we've done exactly the same thing as before, except this time we've given it two labels, just color or none. In reality, you probably have many more products and therefore many more labels. But for this example, we'll just stick with two. And then we chose classify text, put in the input, which is available in the Google Doc if you guys are stuck. And we've kept the model as 04 mini, 40 mini, sorry. Let's check if it works. Perfect. So our classified sentiment has categorized this review as being positive, and it's identified that the review was talking about the color. Now, of course, in a real situation, we might want to combine these two metrics to see which features are being talked about positively and so on. But for the purpose of this webinar, we'll just keep them separate for now. So I'll just pause there to check that has everyone got to this point and is anyone stuck? Feel free to ask any questions and Nathan or I will be able to help. Awesome. Great job, guys. So the final thing we need to do is upload this structured data back to the database so that then we can analyze it when we build out our app. So let's go and do that. Now, today I'm going to use Retool database, which is our free provided Postgres wrapper within your Retool instance. However, obviously in reality, you might need to connect to a separate Postgres table or some other data store that you can feel free to bring in. But for today, we'll use Retool database. So what we'll do is we'll drag in a new block, which connects to a resource query. And we'll choose the resource as a Retool database. You can see it will load the schema here, and our table is going to be called this product reviews table down here. Now, when writing, I prefer to use the GUI mode just because writing back data in SQL can be a little bit tricky. So if you go ahead and flick from SQL to GUI, now it's much easier to insert a row. So we'll start by selecting the table, which will be product reviews. Then we'll choose an action, which comes with a predefined list of actions, so you don't have to code this up from scratch. In this case, we're going to insert the record. And on this table, I've already created an ID sequencer, so we don't actually have to write in an ID, it will just generate it for us. So instead, we'll provide the sentiment, the text, the product feature, and the name instead, and that will compose a row in our data, a labeled row in our database. So let's start with the sentiment. And the sentiment is going to come from our classify sentiment block that we made earlier. Again, we can use the double curly brace notation to reference any other block from this query block. So I'll choose classify sentiment dot data, and that's it. Now we'll do the same thing for the product feature that we got from AI as well. So in this case, it was the color of the lacrosse ball. So again, we'll do the same thing, which will be classify feature dot data. So these two represent our labeled data. Now we'll also have to pass in the unstructured review data as well. So let's add a new row for the text, which will be the text of the review, and we'll reference start trigger.data.text. Finally, we'll reference the product name, which comes from start trigger, data, and product name. Final thing we need to do is we can go ahead and run this and we'll see an entry being added to the database, which I'll show you on my screen and you don't have to check yourself. So if I go ahead and run that, that should add a new record. Great. So to summarize what we did, we added a new block to our workflow, which writes the data back to the database. If you're not seeing the key value pairs, you may need to change it from object to key value, or it may just be a permissions issue that we haven't configured. Has everyone else got to this stage? Okay. Yeah, so there's a little toggle at the bottom right, which may be hiding the rest of the block, in which case you can just drag this toggle or scroll down. But yeah, it's not super important if you haven't got to this stage, as long as you've kind of got the workflow at least together. Cool. So yeah, what we did was we changed it to GUI mode, inserted our row by passing in the key value pairs, where we put in the unstructured data and the structured data. And now if I go to our database, what we should see is a bunch of reviews that have come in about our amazing lacrosse balls. So let's see if that worked. Perfect. Yeah, looks pretty good. And that's it. So now what we've done, just to recap this workflow, is we've taken some unstructured data that Jerry used to have to label manually. We've fed the review text to two different AI models, one to classify the sentiment of the review, one to classify the product feature. And then we've taken the raw data plus the structured labeled data and written it into a database that we can now surface within a Retool app to analyze. And that ends the first part of the webinar. So next, what I'd like to do is produce a dashboard that is able to visualize this data. And today we're going to produce something that hopefully looks like this. So to get started, we'll follow the exact same procedure, and there's a link to the folder that I'd like you to create your apps in. However, if you haven't got the doc open, you can just navigate to the homepage, go to apps, and there should be a folder for the product insight suite. So if you can navigate to this URL here. And once you're there, please go ahead and create a new app just like you did for the workflow. Oops. Sorry. Okay, I'm not sure why that's not working. Give me a sec. Cool. There we go. Yeah, if you just, I think you just need to refresh. Yeah, sorry about that. Was that able to reload it? Yeah, looks like reloading it does fix it. Sorry about that, guys. I think it might just be that everyone's trying to create a new app at the same time. Um, yeah, I'll just hold here to let everyone create a new app. Yeah, so what's happening is if two people try to create a new app at the same time, it needs to index the new ID of the app, so untitled 29 in my case. So if you can go ahead and rename them, that will probably help to resolve that. So it's just because everyone's trying to do it at the same time, so two people try and make an app with the same name. So as people are getting loaded in, I'll just highlight what we're going to do today. So we'll make an app that allows us to review the raw data that we've made in our database. So we see the review and also see the labels that are attached to the review. And then we'll also create two graphs, one to visualize the product sentiment and one to visualize the product features. So those two labels that we made before, we'll have one graph for each. We'll also make those graphs in a couple of different ways to show you how you can use front-end transformers to mutate your data so that you don't have to requery the data every time. So once you've got here, let's start by navigating to the code block. And now I can zoom, so hopefully it should be easier to see. So if you go down to the fourth block down, click on code. Then you go down to where it says page 1. This will create a new page scoped resource query. And again, it will be following the exact same process as we had before, where we create a resource query that queries Retool database. Now, of course, in practice, you'll bring your own data. However, all of our data is currently stored in Retool database. You can also connect to an API or get data from any other source that you have. We'll start with a pretty straightforward query, which will just be to select everything in the table. So if we do select star from product reviews, and this time we'll use the SQL mode, not the GUI mode. Now we can go ahead and run that and check that everything is working, and that looks pretty good to me. So once you've done this, rename this to get reviews, because then we can reference it later. And make sure to use camel case, because otherwise copy and pasting the code might cause some issues. And the final thing we'll do, sorry, yeah, I'll recap everything in in a second. So the last thing that we'll do is just drag in a table at the bottom, so we can leave space for the graphs up top that hopefully contains all our data. So to recap, what we're doing is we started at the code section. We added a new page scoped query by pressing this plus button here. We opted for a resource query. The resource we chose was Retool database. And then in SQL mode, we wrote a simple SQL query to just get all of the data in the table. So that's select star from product reviews. Once we have some data, we can drag in a table by going to the plus icon at the top left, which is where we can add UI components. You can navigate the table, or if it doesn't show up, you can just search for the word table. And then once you drag in the table component, it should pre-populate with your data. If it didn't, pull out the inspector by either pressing Command U or pulling it open up here. And then you can choose a data source. So in this case, it should just be get reviews. Now, what I'd like to do is filter the data. So at the moment, it's just showing every single product in our catalog. However, I'd like to have a selector that allows me to choose. So how do we do that? First step is going to be to go to the component view and searching for the word select. Now you'll see there's a few different options that come up. If you choose the first one, that's going to be a single item select, which is what we're looking for. So if you drag in the select component, you'll see it here. Now, by default, the select component is pre-populated with 3 options. However, we want to map these options to what the product name column here. So all of these unique entries should be selectable as products in our data. So what we'll do is we will go to mapped mode and the selector. So if you pull open the inspector using Command U, whilst clicking on the selector, you can change it to mapped mode and then choose Get Reviews as your data source. Now, by default, it will probably get it wrong what you're looking for. So we'll have to remove everything that's provided. And essentially, in the value column, we will use the double curly brace notation to type in item dot product name. Now, you will get a little warning here because there are duplicate values, but that's okay. It will still work. So now what we should see is that we can see all of the different options, including a few of the typos from the previous section, available to us. However, when I click on running shorts, nothing happens to the table. So let's see how to do that. If you click on the table component, navigate into the inspector, and scroll down and look for a section that says default filters. Once you've found this, click the plus icon, choose product name as the column, and what we'd like to do is check whether it includes the text or equals the text that the user has chosen in the selector. To do this, we can use the double curly braces again, and this time we'll reference select one. And we'll choose the value. The value represents the currently selected option in the selector. Now that we've done that, we'll see that our table has been filtered to the running shorts. Now, sometimes this can cause some issues if your product name column has been set to a tag because it applies a mapping on the table. So to get around this, if you are seeing any strange filtering behavior, what you can do is go to the inspector on the right, click on product name, and change it from a tag to a string. Then you can remove this mapped value and change it to item if needed. However, you don't need to do this for everything. This is just in case your filter is not working. Great. So let's recap what we did. We dragged in a selector. Then we mapped the selector's options to get reviews as our data source, and then passed in the item's product name as the options that we can choose from the selector. Retool does throw a warning, but it automatically deduplicates this for us. Once we had that, we went to the table, opened it up in the inspector, and added a default filter where the product name should include the selector's value. Let's just do a pulse check here to see if everyone got to this point. Awesome. Cool. Okay. On to hopefully the more fun stuff. So what we'll do now is we'll add in some graphs for this data. So the simplest way to populate a graph, because we use Plotly.js in the front end, is to query all of our data in the back end and pass it in the exact format that Plotly expects in the front end. So let's first show how you can create a graph that displays the count of all of the different features for a product mentioned in the reviews for a selected product as selected by this selector. So we'll make a SQL query again. So if you go to code, make a page scoped query, choose a resource query, and choose Retool database. Now, what we're going to do is select the product feature and the count of the number of entries that that has in the table. So to do that in SQL, we can do select product feature and then the count. And we'll make sure to alias this as count, just in case, from product reviews. Now, here we can combine the selected value in the front end to ensure we only query the relevant data in the back end. So to do that, we can add a where statement. So we can add where. Now we'll filter the product name as being equal to the selected value. So here we'll make sure to use a single quote, and then inside your single quotes, we'll use the double curly braces and do select one dot value. Make sure to watch out for any white space at the end. There shouldn't be any, so it should look something like this. Also, you can just copy and paste this directly from the Google Doc. Finally, we'll need to group by the first column, which is product feature. Perfect. So now that we have this, this data can be passed into a bar chart. So if you go ahead, go to the Add UI section and look for a bar chart. So if you type in bar, there should be the option for bar chart here. So if you go ahead and drag this in, what we'll do is we'll put it directly above our table, and I'd like it to span across the whole width here. Oops. Now, Retool is pretty good, and it actually has pre-populated our bar chart for us. But for those who it's either not working for or those who are interested in how you can actually configure this, I'll show you how to do that now. So if it hasn't been configured, you can navigate to the inspector for the bar chart by opening up Command U, clicking on the bar chart, and then going to series. Now the series is the set of data that we're plotting, and we can plot multiple series on a graph, similar to Excel if you've used Excel. Now our data source is query 1, but we'll go and rename that in a second. And we've chosen the type to be bar. We'll choose the X data to be the product feature and the Y data to be the count. And that should work. I'll just go and rename our query and then summarize what we've done. So this query is going to get the review count by feature. So we'll call it that. You can see that it automatically updates on the right as well. Once we added our query, we dragged in a bar chart component by going to components and then bar. We dragged in this bar chart. And then if it didn't configure correctly, you can go ahead and update the series to contain X data and Y data from get review count by feature. Cool. So now we have a graph showing our labeled data, data that was labeled with AI that Jerry no longer has to label, which is great. And it's showing that alongside our table. If you notice that when you change the selector, it will update that query because the query that we were running was specific to the selected product. It will actually update the graph as well. Now, sometimes we have quite a lot of data that we want to get back. And so directly querying the data might not be the best way to access it. Because if we have to query it multiple times, that can cause a performance strain on our database. So now I'll show you a slightly more involved method where you can actually take the existing data and do the effects of the SQL query to group all of the data, but using a JavaScript transformer in the front end instead. So before we do that, I'll just do a quick check to make sure that everyone has got to this point okay. Perfect. Cool. So the next step is going to be to add a JavaScript transformer. So once again, we'll navigate down to the code section, and we're going to write a transform to take the existing review data when we selected all of it and aggregate the review counts. So if you go ahead and add a new query, this time don't select resource query, but instead choose JavaScript transformer. Once you've selected a JavaScript transformer, we'll rename this to get sentiment counts, and we'll remove all the code in here. Now, for those like me who aren't super familiar with JavaScript, I've already written the function, so you can copy and paste this from the Google Doc directly. Note that if you didn't call the first query that we made get reviews, you may need to update this property here. So let me walk through quickly what this code is doing. What this code does is it iterates through the review data and aggregates based on the sentiment of the review. That's a good question. Why transformer and not a query block? So the difference between a transformer and a query block is a transformer only runs when it's needed, whereas a query block you can run page load and runs slightly differently because you can basically query it, like trigger it from everywhere else. Whereas the transformer is sort of part of the dependency graph essentially, so that when something that relies on the transformer updates, then the transformer will recalculate. Great question. So once you have this, you should be able to save it and preview the result as well. I'm not sure why the preview isn't working. This is changed recently, I think. But that should work. Let me see if it's showing in here. I may need to just refresh my editor. Okay, cool. I will try and carry on and add the pie chart. So apologies that the test feature isn't working, but what we can do is then drag in a pie chart. So if you go to add component and then pie and drag that in. Let me just check whether this will work or not. Okay. Sorry about that. Not sure why it's, oh, because I haven't selected anything here. Cool, that works. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, that's probably what's happening. So it might just be that I think because quite a few of us are editing on their instance at once as well. But essentially, I'll walk you through what the steps would have been anyway. So once you dragged in the pie chart, you can choose the data source to be this get sentiment counts object that we've created. And what that should produce, as we can see in the sort of more working app, is it should produce okay, no, we can't see it here. That's fine. So what it should produce is two options, one for the count and one for the review sentiment. And you can also add data labels. So if you go to the data label section, you can then label all of your data, and that should work. So yeah, what we've basically showed there is, unfortunately, it didn't work, but two ways to get data into Retool graphs. So the first was to directly query the data using group by statements so that our data was nicely formatted. and therefore could be passed straight into a bar chart here. And the second was using a JavaScript transformer. Yeah, I think a few too many, it's probably coping with quite a few people editing right now. So that's probably why it didn't work. But that's fine. Yeah, it might be failing because there's an undefined sentiment in the data. So yeah, it's probably because the I didn't account for the test case where the sentiment wasn't included. Good spot. So apologies, sorry about that. I can go ahead and clean up the data after this, and then you guys should be able to see the app looking like it did when I first showed it. Cool. In the interest of time, though, I will move on to the final section. So that's how you can add basically a RAG chatbot into Retool. And we should be able to do this section in pretty much a minute. So back at the start, we identified one of the other tasks that Jerry was doing was supporting the customer support representatives in learning more about the new products. So say, for example, the headphones have a frequency range, they have a warranty, and customers might be asking questions about those. How can we store all of that data in an efficient way? So what we can do is build a chatbot in Retool that we're able to ask questions to. So if you go ahead and click the plus icon and look for LLM chat and drag in an LLM chat component at the top right. What you should see is that it will open up a query for you called LLM chat 1 query 1. And this is again using our Retool AI resource as before. Now, the trick here is we'll keep everything the same, but we're going to add Retool vectors. So Retool vectors is a way that we provide for you to get started with vector storage really quickly without having to go to any external systems. So for example, if I tick this, I can go ahead and choose any document or set of documents that I've uploaded. So a set of documents could be a vector. Now, here you're going to choose Product Insight Suite, but I'll quickly show you on this screen so you don't have to see what's actually contained in that data. So what I've done is I took a PDF and uploaded the text of it to Retool Vectors. Now, in reality, we'll probably have a workflow that uploads all of these items one by one, but I've just pasted everything in here for now. You can see that it contains information about for the product specification of the headphones and the shorts, the two products that we sell at this company. You can add multiple documents here if you like and provide some tags so that the AI can know which document to search through when using the vectors feature. So going back, we should have selected this vector, and that's all you need to do once you've hit save at the top to actually have a chatbot that can answer any questions about one document or a set of documents. So let's see if it works. What we can do is open up the chat interface and type in a message. So in this case, I might ask something like, what's the warranty on the headphones? And if I press enter, now the kind of naive LLM has access via RAG and retool vectors to that data that I passed in before. And now we can see the information is returned to us really, really quickly. And now we have a chatbot where a customer support person can come in and actually not have to go to Jerry directly to get any of this information because it's all built in to the model. Tom's asked a question about data sharing. So essentially the way that it works is if you're using a retool key, we do have like our legal terms on this, so you can kind of read those, but essentially we personally we don't develop any AI models. However, you'll have an agreement with OpenAI that governs all of that. Obviously, if you're using Claude or any other model provider, then you'll be governed by their policies. Cool. So that pretty much sums up everything that I wanted to talk about today. So the last thing you can do is give your app a theme. So I've already created one here. For those who don't know about app themes, it's available on think the Retool Enterprise plan. So if you go to app settings at the bottom left, click on app theme, and then change it from the blue and gray one to the slightly more interesting orange one as well. And that's it. So apologies that the app didn't quite look as good as I wanted it to. But that is the session, and I'll now go into a recap and a Q&A. So let's just summarize what we did. At the start, I promised that we would try to embed AI into real business processes to generate use cases that actually led to an ROI. So hopefully today's example has given you an idea of where AI can be used to speed up and free up people's time. So in this case, we changed Jerry's workflow, but from manually labeling data and manually responding to customer support requests to having AI do everything in the background, and therefore Jerry can just act to maintain that system. We also learned a couple of techniques, apologies that the second one didn't work, to build a dashboard in Retool. So the first was to directly query the data, and the second was to do a transform on it in the front end and make sure your transformer accounts for all of those edge cases. And hopefully in under a minute, you were able to learn more about Retool vectors, which is a way to provide RAG context to any LLM chat and immediately drag it into a Retool app to then ask questions about a document with an AI chat. So I'd like to stop there and ask if there are any questions before I then talk about the next webinar that we're going to be organizing. So I see there's a few questions in the chat that we can go through. So the first question from Thomas is, how do you practically integrate data from a database rather than from a PDF in a chatbot? So having to like chatting with the data in the database. That's a great question. So technically, you could do that in Retool using the double curly brace notation to actually query the data into your app and then pass the app data as context into the LLM. However, as your data gets larger and larger, you're going to use up more and more tokens um, to basically chat with that data because you have to load in all of the data in the first place, and you might even exceed the model's context window. So in that case, it can be a little bit tricky to set up, and there are other kind of providers that allow you to do that I'm not super familiar with off the top of my head, but chatting with your data is kind of a much broader topic, and it is possible in Retool, but there are some scaling issues that ultimately you may need to go to a third party for. But that's a great question. Tajinder says, my organization keeps pushing Copilot. And Retool supports some Copilot in the future. That is great because I'm about to talk about that in a second. So bear with us. And someone's posted the hopefully a corrected function to remove the nulls. So thank you very much for that. So if you go ahead and try that, hopefully the app will work now. So yeah, Charles, is your question just around the transformer? So the transformer is essentially just a function that's listening for any changes to its input, and then it will rerun by itself. And I can send out the kind of, or Nathan can find the docs on transformers and share them in the chat. Cool. And feel free to pop any other questions in the chat, and if we don't answer them today, we'll get back to you offline. But thank you very much for attending the webinar today. And I'll just wrap up with pretty much answering to Jinder's point, which is a sneak preview of what we're calling Retool Assist, which is going to be a way to build and edit Retool apps using natural language. So it's something that a lot of people have been waiting for, and we'll actually be looking at that live with Ewan on the 23rd of September in the next series of this webinar. So if you enjoyed today, please feel free to scan the QR code. It should take you to the events page where you can sign up. And Ben's also posted the link in the chat as well. And what we'll do is we'll talk about how you can vibe code, as the industry likes to say, an application from Retool all the way into having something that works in production. And I think that's it. So thank you all very much for attending and hope to see you at the next one. Take care.